There is a dangerous beauty in raw ambition and the lengths people will go to achieve their ultimate dreams. Witness the rise and the risks in our latest series of high-stakes cinematic dramas. Hit subscribe now and see what happens when the stakes are high.
Sign this, Dad. From now on, I'll be managing your finances. It's for your own good. My son slid a stack of papers across the kitchen table like he was closing a business deal. Power of attorney. Bank account access forms. A letter authorizing direct deposit changes. All of it neatly clipped together with a binder clip, like he'd had someone prepare it in advance. I looked at the papers. Then I looked at him. Then at my daughter-in-law sitting in my living room with her legs crossed, scrolling through her phone like this was a routine errand she'd tagged along for. I picked up the pen he placed on top of the stack. "You know what, Derek?" I said. "You might be right." And I smiled. He didn't know it yet, but that smile was the beginning of the end for him. My name is Victor. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a contracts attorney in Portland, Oregon, which means I have spent the better part of my adult life reading documents that other people hoped no one would read carefully. I retired 4 years ago with a pension, a paid-off house on Hillside Drive, and what I thought was a clear understanding of my son. I was wrong about the last part. Derek is 36. He works, or worked, I should say, as a residential real estate broker. He's charming the way a good salesman is charming, attentive when he needs something, distant when he doesn't. His wife, Cassandra, is 34. She grew up in a wealthy family in Scottsdale, Arizona, and she has never quite adjusted to the fact that Derek's income is inconsistent, which is the polite way of saying that he has good months and catastrophic months and very little in between. When they got married 6 years ago, I was happy for them. When they bought a house in a neighborhood that was, in my opinion, about $40,000 above their budget, I kept my mouth shut. When Derek came to me the first time asking for a loan, $22,000 to cover a gap between commission checks, I helped him. He paid it back. Slowly, but he paid it back. The second time is $15,000. He paid back 11 of it before the repayments quietly stopped. The third time, he didn't frame it as a loan at all. He called it a family investment. He had found a development project on the east side of Portland, 3 residential units. He needed a cosigner on the construction loan because his own credit had taken some hits. Nothing serious, he said, just a few late payments during a slow quarter. The loan was for $140,000. He needed my name on it, he said. Just temporarily. Just until the project sold and the profit came in. I asked to see the financials. He showed me numbers on a spreadsheet that looked impressive until I looked at the assumptions underneath them. Optimistic sale prices, understated construction costs, a timeline that assumed 0 delays. I told him I had concerns. He told me the opportunity wouldn't wait. Cassandra texted him while we were talking, and he glanced at his phone 3 times in 4 minutes. I told him I needed a few days to think about it. What I actually needed was a few days to start paying attention. I had not been paying close attention before that. That was my mistake, and I'll own it. When you raise a child and you love them, you extend a kind of ongoing credit of trust that can run well past its limit before you notice. I'd been so focused on the big ask, the cosign, the $140,000, that I hadn't been looking at the smaller picture. So I started looking. I pulled up my bank account on a Tuesday morning with a cup of coffee and my reading glasses, and I went through 12 months of statements line by line, the way I used to go through contracts looking for buried clauses. What I found took me 2 hours to fully process. There were 18 ATM withdrawals over the previous 11 months that I had no memory of making. Most of them were between $200 and $500. 3 of them were $800. They came from machines in neighborhoods I don't visit. The Pearl District, the Lloyd Center area, a gas station on Southeast 82nd that I'm fairly certain I've never been to in my life. The total was $6,400. I sat very still for a long time. Then I kept looking. My cable bill had been redirected. The account was still in my name, but the billing address had been changed to Derek and Cassandra's house on Morrison Street. Same with my home warranty service. A gym membership I didn't recognize had been opened using my email address and charged to my Visa point $9 a month for 8 months, $492 total. A streaming service I had never signed up for, $14.99 a month for 11 months. When I added it all up, the number was just over $9,000 across those 11 months. $9,000. Not a dramatic heist. Not a single large theft that would have been immediately obvious. It was a slow bleed, carefully sized to stay under the threshold where most people start asking questions. Most people. Not a retired contracts attorney who spent 3 decades looking for exactly this kind of thing. I didn't call Derek. I didn't confront him. I didn't change my PIN, though I understand why people ask why I didn't, and I'll explain that in a moment. Instead, I called my former colleague, a woman named Margaret, who spent 20 years as a forensic financial consultant before retiring to Eugene. I explained the situation. She told me what I needed to document and how to document it. Then I called my state attorney and made an appointment for the following week. I did not change my PIN because I needed Derek to keep using it. Every transaction he made from that point forward was evidence. Every ATM withdrawal was a data point. I had already contacted my bank's fraud department quietly, flagged the account, and arranged for enhanced logging of all activity. My bank assigned a specialist named Paul, and Paul and I spoke every Friday morning for the next 9 weeks. Meanwhile, I let Derek believe everything was fine. He came to dinner twice during this period. I cooked both times, pot roast the first time, grilled salmon the second. Cassandra complimented my kitchen. I asked about their new furniture, which I had noticed was all high-end on a visit the previous month. She said they'd found a great deal. I nodded and passed the bread. At no point during either dinner did I give any indication that I knew anything. This is the part that's hard to explain to people who haven't had to do it. When you discover that someone you love has been stealing from you, there are approximately 48 hours where you feel a grief so complete and total that you can't do anything except sit with it. I sat with it. I cried once, in my car, in the parking lot of the grocery store on a Wednesday afternoon. Then I wiped my face, and I drove home, and I kept building my case. 6 weeks into my documentation, Derek came back with the cosign request again. He said the window was closing. The developer needed an answer. He brought the paperwork in person on a Saturday morning, and that's when Cassandra came with him, and that's when he slid the additional papers across my kitchen table. The power of attorney. The bank access forms. It'll just make things easier, he said, for managing your accounts while we're handling the investment together. I looked at the papers. I picked up the pen. You might be right, I said. What I signed was nothing. I initialed 2 blank pages in a notepad I keep by the phone, because the moment he pushed those forms toward me, I placed them under the notepad and pulled it on top. My kitchen table is cluttered. He didn't notice. Cassandra was still on her phone. When they left, I called Paul at the bank. Then I called Margaret. Then I called my attorney, James, who had been waiting for exactly this conversation. The trap, as Margaret helped me design it, was simple and legal. I contacted the developer directly, not through Derek. I told the developer I had concerns about my son's representation of the deal and asked for an independent copy of the offering documents. The developer, who had no idea what Derek may or may not have told me, sent them without hesitation. What I found was that Derek had been representing himself as already having the cosigner secured for over 2 months. He had used that claim to negotiate a favorable position in the project lineup. He had, in effect, used my name and creditworthiness as a bargaining chip without my authorization. That was not a civil matter. James confirmed it within 24 hours. Given the financial institutions involved and the interstate elements of the communication, what Derek had done crossed into wire fraud territory. We had the documentation. We had the bank records. We had the developer's emails, which Derek had copied me on without realizing how thoroughly they documented his misrepresentations. I called Derek on a Thursday evening. I told him I had reviewed everything and I was ready to move forward. I suggested we meet Friday morning at James's office to finalize the paperwork, and I mentioned that I had spoken with the developer directly just to do my own due diligence, and everything looked great. There was a pause on the phone. "You talked to the developer?" he said. "Of course," I said. "I'm co-signing an $140,000 loan. I wanted to hear it from the source." Another pause. "That's fine," he said. "Friday works." He showed up Friday at 9:30 with Cassandra and a folder of documents. James was already there. Paul from the bank was there by phone on conference. And a contact of James's from the district attorney's financial crimes unit was there in person, which Derek did not anticipate. I watched my son's face as he looked around the room and understood what kind of meeting this actually was. Cassandra stood up immediately and said she didn't understand why they were there and that she had a showing at 11. James asked her to please sit down. She looked at Derek. Derek had gone the color of old concrete. I placed on the table a printed summary of every unauthorized ATM withdrawal, the billing address changes, the gym membership, the streaming service, the developer correspondence, the bank records with Paul's annotations, 41 pages, paper-clipped. I've been building this for 9 weeks, I said. I want you to understand that nothing in this room is a surprise to me. Everything here has already been reviewed by James, by my bank, and by the gentleman from the district attorney's office. Derek said my name. Just my name. Dad, I said. I know. What followed over the next 4 months was the legal process. I won't detail every step because some of it is still subject to ongoing matters that James has advised me not to discuss publicly. What I can tell you is that the unauthorized account access resulted in Derek being charged with identity theft and financial exploitation. The developer fraud, the misrepresentation of my co-signature resulted in additional charges. Cassandra, whose fingerprints were metaphorically all over several of the billing redirections, and who had made direct contact with the developer on Derek's behalf in several documented emails, was named as a co-defendant on 2 counts. Derek's real estate license was suspended pending the outcome of the criminal case. The house on Morrison Street, the one that was $40,000 above their budget, went on the market in February. It sold in 3 weeks. I am not going to pretend that any of this felt like victory. People use the word justice, and I understand why, but what I felt when the charges were filed was not satisfaction. It was closer to exhaustion, and underneath the exhaustion was a grief that I think will probably never fully go away, because I did not raise my son to become a man who would steal from me. Something happened along the way, something that I have spent a significant amount of time thinking about in the months since. I think that something was Cassandra, though I want to be careful how I say that, because Derek is a grown man and his choices are his own. But I watched over 6 years as his decisions bent consistently in the direction of her expectations. The house they couldn't afford was her preference, the luxury car lease in her name, which I later discovered Derek had been subsidizing from funds that should not have been available to him, was her preference. The development project, when I finally traced the origin of the idea, had been introduced to Derek by Cassandra's brother, who had a financial interest in the developer's company. She was named in the charges because the evidence named her. That was not my choice. That was the consequence of her choices. Derek pleaded guilty to 2 of the charges in a negotiated arrangement. He is serving a period of supervised probation and has a repayment order that covers the full amount of the unauthorized withdrawals, plus interest, plus legal costs. The criminal conviction means he cannot hold a real estate license in Oregon. He is currently working in his uncle's hardware business in Medford, which is about 3 hours south of Portland. I visited him there in April. I want to tell you about that visit because I think it matters. He had lost weight. He was stocking shelves when I arrived. Actual manual labor, which he had not done at any point in his adult life that I was aware of. He saw me come through the door and he stopped moving completely. We stood there in an aisle full of pipe fittings and deck screws, and neither of us said anything for probably 20 seconds. Then he said, "I didn't think you'd come." I said, "I almost didn't." We had lunch at a diner across the street. He talked. I mostly listened. He said things that I believe were true, and some things I'm still not sure about. He said Cassandra had filed for divorce in January, which I had not known. He said the development deal, the one he'd been chasing, had been her brother's scheme from the beginning. That he'd been promised a cut that would have covered all of their debts, and that he'd told himself that taking a little money from my accounts was borrowing, not stealing, because the project was going to make everything right. I told him that the logic of a man rationalizing a crime always sounds like the logic of a man who believes the ends justify the means, and that in 31 years of contract law, I had seen that logic destroy more people than I could count. He nodded. He didn't argue. Before I left, I told him something I want to share here, because a number of people have asked me in messages what I would say to parents in a similar situation. I told him that the reason I built the case instead of confronting him immediately wasn't because I was angry, though I was. It wasn't because I wanted to destroy him, though the outcome was destructive. It was because I had watched 11 months of small thefts and understood that a man capable of that level of sustained deception was not going to stop because I asked him to. He needed a wall, not a conversation, not a warning, not another extension of my credit of trust. A wall, something that stopped the behavior completely. I told him that building that wall was the hardest thing I have done since his mother died. He cried at the dinner table. I did not. I had already done my crying alone in a parking lot on a Wednesday afternoon 9 months earlier. I drove back to Portland on Highway 99W. It was a clear evening in April, the kind of evening that makes Oregon look like a painting, and I thought about the version of my son I had believed in for 36 years and the version I had spent 9 weeks documenting. I don't know yet how to hold both of those versions at the same time. I'm told that takes years. What I know is this: I am 68 years old. I am not confused, I am not easily manipulated, and I did not need my finances managed by anyone. I needed my son to become the man I raised him to be. He wasn't there yet when he slid those papers across my kitchen table. Whether he gets there eventually is up to him, but the version of me who smiled and picked up that pen, the version who spent 9 weeks building an airtight case instead of making an emotional phone call, that version made sure the choice was real, made sure there were actual consequences that couldn't be minimized or explained away or barred against. The moment I stopped absorbing Derek's bad decisions was the moment I started treating him like an adult. That might be the most difficult, most important thing I have ever done as a father. If you've been watching these stories and you see pieces of your own life in them, if you have someone in your family who is slowly, quietly testing the edges of what you'll allow, I want you to know something. Protecting yourself is not betrayal. Setting a boundary is not cruelty. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them experience the full weight of what they've chosen. If this story resonated with you, please leave a comment and let me know your thoughts. I read every single one. If you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. And stay with us, because the next story is one I think will stay with you for a long time.